You look like you got a pretty high def camera going on over there. I guess you've been doing a lot of Zoom calls with your patients.
Well, I had this camera before, so I can't claim I've upped my game for Zoom, but I did up my monitor recently, but that was for gaming. So
I got you. So you're a big gamer. That's something I did not know about you.
if I say Alienware, does that mean anything to you?
It doesn't. Okay. I haven't been a gamer since I was probably in about 6th grade. So
okay, yeah. So if you were into gaming, you would know. Oh, that's a gaming computer. So my laptop, my desktop, yeah, they're both Alienware.
All right. Well, I appreciate you taking the time to do this. I don't know if you remember me. You and I worked together for a little while when you were in Philly. I actually worked for a longer time with Harold.
Okay.
Before I kind of came to you for a different OCD issue, and you sort of scared the hell out of me the first session, and there was no BS there. And
but I didn't scare you out of the session.
No.
Oh, good. Okay.
I actually came to you for trouble with sleep. I was afraid of not sleeping, and you said, good, I want you to stay awake for the next 2 weeks. And you said, I know you're worried about it, but I'm not. And
it's not my problem, right?
It's not your problem, right? And so since I've seen you guys, I do feel as though I've made a ton of progress on my OCD. I started posting just random OCD videos on YouTube, just giving people some of my insights, and it sort of blossomed. As of this week, cool. I have over 1,000 subscribers, and I make videos that I feel like sometimes there's a lot of debate going on within the community. And I do find it a little bit hard sometimes to pinpoint where certain experts come down on certain treatment strategies. If it could be the case that there are different treatment strategies that do work for OCD, if it's just a question of this is what we see works the best versus, we've tried this and we don't see a ton of progress. And so I still open your book a lot, and I talk about your book, and I talk about you a lot. So I don't know, hopefully maybe some people have come your way based on my videos.
Yeah. Which version of the book is it?
It is not the new version. It's not the updated version.
All right. There are a few things in it.
Yeah. So that was actually my first question. Since this book was released, I think it was 2001.
But yeah, I think
2003. Okay. Would you quickly be able to talk about some of if there's any major updates that you've made from this book to your revised edition?
I can tell you that it's 11% different, or 15%. I can't remember. And you're wondering, like, why would I know that number? Because when I talked to them and I wanted to say, hey, can we do an updated edition? They said to me, well, what percent of it's going to be, what percent are you adding to it? And I said, what percent do I have to add? And they gave me a percent, and I said, like, okay, I can do that. I didn't know if I could, but but I did add that much. So it's about 15% different. I think some differences, certain things are updated. Acceptance and commitment therapy ACT is incorporated into the book with my opinions of how to use it and misuse it in the treatment of OCD. So it supports the use of it, but it also talks about there are ways to misuse it. So that's obviously not a good idea. Yeah. I think there are a couple of presentations where I talk a little bit more about them. I haven't looked at the book for a couple of years, so I can't remember exactly, but I know there's some stuff about hyper awareness, obsessing about obsessing. And I think we added a little bit more about obsessive staring. So I think there are certain manifestations of OCD we added to. And then I think other little things that I, changed since I figured out some things over 14 years between the two publications, or 11 years.
Yeah.
So I think the ACT one is the one that happens to stand out most in my mind, because in the field, there was a lot of theoretical infighting over that, and I always thought it was mistaken, because it initially took the form of ACT versus exposure and response prevention. was kind of stupid because it's kind of like not, there were definitely things ACT had. There were definitely things that ACT was doing that we were already doing.
Right.
But ACT formalized it in certain ways that kind of refine that thinking. So again, the question wasn't which one. The question is, what's the most useful way to incorporate this so that it's working on OCD? So since I'm always really opinionated, that set of opinions of what I believe is the right way to use ACT is part of that. I said, I think there's some other things with some manifestations that are in there. I'd have trouble remembering the specifics at this moment.
Yeah. Could you touch on that a little? What do you think are the ways people are misusing ACT in the treatment of OCD?
Well, there are a few. One of the prime ideas of ACT is they talk about diffusion, like how am I not going to connect so much to an idea? That idea, that they have this mantra that they teach people that a thought is just a thought. Now, it's very important in ACT that you're learning to think in a non-judgmental way. So that statement is no good for most people who suffer from OCD. Because for a non-sufferer, that's a nice, clear statement that doesn't have judgment. For somebody with OCD, that often has judgment. If I have, fears of me, killing people, me saying a thought is just a thought is actually a neutralizing ritual.
Right.
So I have to make that modification. So I think people who use ACT without making modifications, in a sense, they're accidentally trying to comfort people. And of course, trying to have somebody with OCD become certain is not easy. On the other hand, if we talk about everything is uncertain, that is actually a thought of diffusion, because it's basically saying I can't depend on anything for sure, that everything is a guess, which I would argue has nothing to do with OCD. I would say that's true in all life. Mm-hmm. Everything's just a guess. And the closest we have to anything is, we have some knowledge of probabilities in areas, so we may guess with that. Safety is rarely a fact. It's more often a probability statement. Low probability, we're calling it safe, but you want it to be safe. I can't think of what is safe by the definition of definite. So, so I think that's kind of diffusing, because if no thought has a definite meaning, it's like, well, how do I live with all possible meanings?
Right. And I find, and this is an area where obviously there's some disagreement too among experts with this whole, it's just a thought. That kind of thing has been tossed around, I'd imagine, in some of the books that I read dating back to maybe the mid 90s. And still some therapists who suggest responding to your OCD thoughts.
Yeah. Now I don't know how many, unless you give names, I don't know many of the ones I think are really good.
Yeah, I agree.
That. I mean, some of them probably do, and I'd sit there and fight with them. But yeah, I don't, yes, we can, because I can find, the cool thing about drugs, if somebody says they were given a medication, I know exactly what happened. Right? They got X drug at X dose. It's definite. Somebody says to me, I had exposure and response prevention. I don't know what they did. It may be really good. It may not. I frequently see the biggest mistake I see among therapists, and therapists who aren't even new therapists, is that they have not really obtained agreement from the person that they want to live with uncertainty. They've said the words and the person said it, but they didn't really talk about wait, we're talking about this really can happen. This is what you might want to do. And I think the other major failure of therapists, if I'm asking somebody to live with uncertainty, there are a few reasons to do so, right? The core reason is it's not like you have a choice. If you know a way to be certain, I'm going to start paying you to teach me. I'll be impressed. So, we don't have that choice. But if I'm asking somebody to live with uncertainty, that feels really risky. And a lot of therapists fail to take the person's, the risk that they're feeling seriously, because I have to come up with arguments that make it seem worth it, you know, and they're kind of just stuck on probability in a sense. So I've come up with a, you know, you would think I own a gun because I have so many gun tests. So I have one that I've been asking therapists if I want them to understand what they're asking of the sufferers. I'll say to them, suppose I give you a gun with 1,000 chambers. One chamber has a bullet, the other 50 million bucks. Will you aim that gun at your kid? So they say no. So, okay, you want 1,000, let's make it easier. 10,000 chambers, a 1 in 10,000 chance of killing your kid and 9,999 chances of, you know, being 50 million bucks. Will you pull the trigger then? And of course they say no. All right, final one. We're doing 100,000 chambers, 1 in 100,000. You know, I think the risk of a car crash might be greater than that. Will you pull that trigger? And they still say no, which, you know, I expect. And it's like, okay, that's what you're asking clients to do. Because, you know, they're just looking, it's like, oh, that thing's not a problem for me, so it's not really that important. You know, like, you know, it's like, no, that's what it feels like. So you have to have arguments and, you know, that makes sense to that person so that they don't have another choice or it's reasonable to take that risk. You know, because for me, I think the initial part of treatment is, can I get you to actually agree? Lots of people, yeah, that's the first session. There are people where it takes me 3 months to get to that agreement. It doesn't make sense for me to do heavy exposure if the person hasn't really agreed to that because they're holding back.
Yeah. And so, you know, this is a thing I talk about a lot, is that I feel like I said yes to that question. I'm ready to live in uncertainty, but I kept finding little ways to not. You know, every time the OCD flared up, I found some little way to cheat it. And I think I did that for probably about 3 years.
Yeah, OCD is very creative.
Yeah. I mean, it'll find a way to wiggle into anything. Yeah. And so is that something you find you have to continually check in with clients? Hey, do you still understand these concepts we were talking about? Do you find people still cheating?
Well, I think there are some probably cases because everything is, but I think, you know, most people, right, it is a struggle because it was easy. They would have gotten better without me.
Yeah.
You know, and some people cheat a little bit, you know, they're all sneaky ways. Everybody for any problem cheats. And, you know, so people do it, you know, it's like, oh, this time is different. Oh, I've had such a hard day. Like, I can't handle this right now. It's just going to be this one. You know, we have an entire list. I have a list of them, of excuses that we use, you know, and it's hard for us to be so conscious that we realize, okay, this is a lie I'm telling myself. So yeah, I think people cheat and people forget, you know, so we may have to go around that circle. I've seen something. I had one fellow I'm allowed to talk about. He had the fear of going crazy. And it took him about 3 months to like fully buy into like, okay, we're going to risk me going crazy. And he went through a cycle that I see many people go through. He'd be pissed off and it's like, screw it, I'll go crazy, fine. And he'll do really great work. And like the problem would lift. And he'd be going pretty good. And then it would start to peak back and it's like, oh, I don't want this to come back. And so I got to, what am I going to do to make it not come back? So he'd start doing little rituals and avoidances, you know, which, you know, when you're standing back, it's like, let's see, exposure got you out of it. You're beginning to slip in. What you're doing to avoid it, what you're doing to prevent yourself from going back is the thing that made you sick in the first place. So it'd have this up and down thing. Now, it also turned out that when he was feeling really good, it's like, well, I don't need to do exposure. And I said, yeah, like you always need to do it. So he's like, wait, you mean when I'm doing really well, I have to poke the bear? Because I thought that was such a great way to put it. It's like, you know, hey, it's sleeping. I don't want to wake it up. And it's like, yep, got to poke the bear. So we had this up and down thing, because it was kind of funny when he would go down and be like, I don't know what's happening. Why is it so bad again? And we would kind of literally go through the exact same description of like, here's what you were doing, here's what you did, until it became consistent. Like even when he was feeling great, he would do the really scary things, which, at times would really upset him. We found some really horrifying exposures for him. The other thing that would happen with him is I'd always say like, oh, I got an idea. And he'd always go like, oh no, what? So yeah, I think that's a normal cycle, and everybody's different as to how they treat that cycle, how they
Yeah,
learn to
it's funny.
dedicate themselves to it.
Yeah, it's like people will make a certain amount of progress, and somewhere in that, through whatever they've been practicing, they've found a new set of comfort, of new rituals that they now can't interfere with. So is that something, do you recommend?
Won't.
Yeah,
interfere with.
Won't. Sorry, yeah, good catch.
I'm a pain in the neck.
So do you recommend continued ERP for people even after they've reported, hey, I'm feeling very free from my symptoms?
In my dream world, I talk about like what a maintenance program would need to look like. Because maintaining gains is different than all the work you did to get to those gains. They're separate processes. So it's like making the change and there's maintaining it. And I think there are bunches of things that can be done that are useful. I expect, because people are human, that for the most part, eventually they'll kind of slip off their program, of being careful. I think one of the great things about the support group when people come is it's a constant reminder of like, oh wait, there are these little stragglers, or this is peaking up. Oh yeah, I should jump on this. So I mean, I think involvement is really good. I'm suspecting if you're doing these podcasts, even though your goal isn't like, I want to be like in the OC fighting frame of mind, it's hard for you to keep talking about this stuff with some frequency and not maintain that. For my friends who are OC therapists with OCD, like Shala Neisler, John Hirschfield, all of them work with OCD because they really love working with OCD.
Yeah.
They did not do it like, I'm doing this to help myself. Right. But it's actually incredibly helpful for them, because for somebody who comes to them, they have to do this work every day of reminding themselves of all the things they need to do. Well, for Shala and John, they're saying this like every day. They're spending hours saying this stuff.
Yeah.
Now, like the thing, I don't know how much you know of Shala Neisler's work. The thing I love about Shala is Shala will talk about slipping. Because here she is, she's, a really accomplished OC therapist. She's really doing well. And Shala will admit to being human, that, sometimes she'll slip and she'll do just the right stuff the way, she's supposed to do. Other times she'll slip and she'll admit, she's like, I'll mess up, mess up for a couple hours or whatever, and I'll pay for it. I will have a couple of bad days because I did that, but I'll get back on track. And so, I think it's nice that, the process of maintaining is going to be imperfect. You're going to slip. If slipping is a failure, you're going to be a failure. Slipping is just, I'm afraid, normal. It sucks, but it's normal. And the other thing that Shala always will talk about, the importance of that many people with OCD are not good at, is self-compassion.
Yeah.
Like be loving enough to yourself. It's like, yes, have some feelings about, I got to get off this slip. This isn't good for me, but don't beat the hell out of yourself so much that it's like you give up.
Yeah. Yeah. I often say, treat yourself the way you would treat the person you love the most in your life. That's a practice that has worked well for me, especially during when I was working with you and Harold and feeling like I did want to slip. I'd imagine what would I tell my best friend that would come to me and say, I really want to do this ritual right now. And it was very easy in that place to sort of depersonalize myself from and say, well, look, this is what you should do. You know what you should do, and just don't do that.
That was perfect, by the way. I hate to say perfect, but it was.
Yeah. Well, it's still a practice that, I practice this stuff with any sort of negative feeling that comes up now.
Mhm.
And I would say for me, the RP of ERP has been something that I've continued. I mean, I definitely don't ritualize. Every now and again, the gay thought pops up. And if it seems to stick around for more than 10 minutes, then sometimes I'll say, you know what, let's just go do an exposure and
Right.
remind myself of the fact that, yeah, maybe I am. Maybe I can't get an answer to this. And I still don't have certainty on it. You know, and it tends to, even though it's not my goal to just make it go away, it does tend to just, oh yeah, you've been living this way for 8
Yeah.
years now. So,
Mhm.
you know, so yeah, I mean, here's another thing that comes up all the time. I get these people, obviously, that don't like my suggestions that are difficult to say, the acceptance of uncertainty, to stop looking for an answer. I'll get people that say this very often. My therapist told me on my first session that I'm not gay, I'm not a pedophile, I will never harm my children. And then they explain to me that this is all OCD. And what I find with every one of these people is they're stuck using that as their main ritual. And
Well, and here's a great answer. I hear you saying that, but obviously it doesn't work for you.
yeah,
And we can talk about odds, but you know, I don't know that I'm not going to wake up tomorrow and decide I love men. I don't expect that. I happen to not worry about it, but how the heck would I know? You know,
right.
and anything is possible. So it may be a low probability. However, here's the problem with you. You want it to be no probability. And although you're telling me your therapist said that, do you believe it's like absolutely impossible that that could ever happen? Because if you believe that's absolutely impossible could ever happen, why are we talking?
Yeah. Right.
So it's like, you know, I
So
would
when you
argue
sit
that
down, with a client for your first session, I can't remember. Again, I worked with Harold for probably 2 years before I came to talk to you about anything. I don't remember either of you guys ever giving me any bit of reassurance that
we were
this,
pains in the ass.
yeah. But I mean, to me, it seems pretty easy that there's a way that someone in your position can explain what OCD is without giving reassurance that the person is definitely suffering just from OCD, and that even if they are having OCD, that the thought may not still be true.
Yeah.
And so it seems to me, and some therapists even say, I give that reassurance on the first session because I know it's not going to stick and they're going to forget about it in the next day. But again, I see people now using that over and over as their main ritual.
Well, yeah, I mean, if I'm a therapist, why am I going to, I say to people, I will never, well, hopefully never, I will not say something to you just to make you feel good.
Mm.
If I say it to you, I believe it. So you could accuse me of not knowing you well. If I give you a compliment, like maybe you think I don't know you, that might be true, but I believe it. Because what is the point of saying something to you where I don't believe it, which means I know this is going to fail? Like, I don't see, like making you feel better right now, just to fall on your face later has no point. So I will tell you what I believe. And, if it's something not nice, I will try to tell you gently, but what is the point of lying to you? And, for a therapist to say it's your OCD, I know that your OCD is focused on it, but if you had a fear of getting cancer, I can't say that you'll never have cancer. If you have a fear of house burning down, I can't say the house won't burn down. I don't know. All I know is anything is possible. So my niece, who's gay, she and her lover had been together since college. They were together 20 years. And her lover, in the space of 1 week, met a guy and left her for a guy. Like, what the hell is that? Now I have no idea what was in her lover's mind all those years, whether she had feelings both ways or whatever, but that was a tad unexpected. My niece was really pissed off. So when, things may be unlikely, but not no probability. And so you have to deal with how would you deal with it if tomorrow you wake up, you're gay and suddenly think like, oh my God, like kissing a man's hairy face, like that seems so great. And burying my head in his crotch, like, how did I not know I loved that? The only thing I can say about your gayness now is at this moment, you don't have a conscious plan to seek out the same sex partner. I have that same plan as you.
Yeah.
I don't know what tomorrow is. And then tomorrow will be more complicated if it hits me, because it's like, well, let's say there's my wife also. And as far as I know, I love her. So, I don't know, will I, live a second best life? Will I don't really know. So I kind of treat it like the fact that, and you may remember me saying this to you, Tim, I do have a belief about you that I want to check out. I believe that you do not want to be maimed, paralyzed, or disfigured.
That's true, yeah.
Oh, good. Okay. Great relief to hear that. For me, for yourself, for your listeners, your family. And how do you get around town?
Yeah, I drive my car.
Right. So you risk some idiot ramming you, and leaving you in that situation. And your brilliant plan is, I hope it doesn't happen, and I'm not going to deal with it till I'm bleeding out, crushed under the metal. So for non-OC concerns, usually it's like, yeah, I don't want that to happen. I'll just deal with it if it happens. It's like, okay, that's what I want to do with gay. It's like, maybe it'll happen. And I ask people like, how would you gay? Because, if you wake up tomorrow gay, well, it doesn't mean you have to live a gay lifestyle. Like, you might like that better, but, it's like, oh, you know what? I think that's inconvenient. I will settle for second best. Like, I'll just stay with the opposite sex because, I don't feel like going through all that trouble. So I could wake up that way. I can choose whether I'm going to do that or not. I'll just have different sexual fantasies while I'm doing sex. And, in some sense, all of us settle for second best because, if you're going to be married 50 years, I suspect if you don't get divorced in between, your spouse is not going to look the way they did when they were 25.
Certainly.
Technically, looks-wise, they are second best, and probably you're just not trading in every 10 years for, the next best thing because, so, right, there's no perfection, no anything. So the idea, I'll live the second best life, is like, okay, you could choose that or not, but the best time to deal with it is if you wake up tomorrow and find out that that's what you want.
Right. Yeah. And in the meantime, put down the question because you're not going to figure it out. It's not.
Yeah. The best you get is like, I don't have a conscious current plan to do that.
Yeah. And I apologize for the confusion. I'm using I don't have a Zoom account. So my roommate is Timothy.
I was thinking.
Yeah.
I was thinking, wait. It's Brian, but it says Timothy. I'm just going to say that.
I didn't realize until you just said it that, his name's popped up down there.
All right. And it's not my Zoom, so I can't control it. I would change your name.
Yeah, that's okay.
Right. Sorry, Brian. Yes. I don't know what I'm doing. Yeah. Old and senile.
No, that one's totally on me. So yeah, that suggestion you just gave there of maybe you wake up and realize you're gay and you don't have to live a gay lifestyle. I find that OCD people really don't like that suggestion. It's the same suggestion of in your podcast with Stu when you talk about POCD, and you say,
my favorite.
Yeah, and you say, okay, let's say you wake up tomorrow and you realize this isn't just OCD. I mean, you really want this. Does that mean you have to go out and start assaulting children on the street? No, you don't have to do anything.
Right.
You could make the choice, as I'm guessing there are actual pedophiles that do.
I assume there must be a bunch we don't know about, because let's face it, although I think there is a group that does it, but for the most part, I'm going to shut up and not tell anybody. If I'm suppressing that, I'm not telling anybody, because I mean, one of the troubles with POCD is that even if you try to explain it to someone, they're going like, okay, stay away from my kid. I think there's a small group of people with POCD who are kind of this ballsy out there person, like, yeah, I got this. This is my OCD, and kind of screw you if you don't like it. I think they can get away with it. I'm not recommending people do that, but those people can do that. I think the other thing I find helpful when I'm talking to those people, and we're in this, like, imagine you woke up with it, because it's like I'm a horrible person. Then even if I don't do it, I need to kill myself and all this. And the usual breakthrough that is like, suppose your brother or son came to you with this. They're like, I woke up, I have these feelings, like I know I want to do it. I'm not going to do it. What should I do? Are you going to tell them to kill themselves? Are you going to? And usually people are kinder to their children or brother. And we point out, like, okay, sorry, there's a double standard here. And what we've done is we presented a way to live with that, even if it happens. And it's like, well, what if I actually do it? Well, it's the car accident.
Right.
Yeah, we'll certainly see if we can help you avoid it. And if you do it, right, we'll have to take action.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you find that I find that POCD doesn't get talked about or written about nearly as much. It seems to be the sort of ultimate, objectively from a non-OCD standard person, from a non-OCD person's point of mind. If you were to say, what's the worst one you could get? And my response to that when people say that is, well, it may seem like that to a non-OCD person, but you got to remember, the person who has a fear that they're going to piss their pants in public is just as terrified of that fear as the person with POCD.
I said the POCD is unacceptable publicly, because the public doesn't, but hey, the public doesn't understand it. But in agreement with you, I usually say that the worst form of OCD is whichever form you are currently suffering from.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, here's a new thing that I really wanted to talk to you about. And maybe like 2 weeks ago, I made a video talking about what's called Rumination-Focused ERP.
Okay.
Which seems to be a sort of new camp emerging that basically endorses the idea that human beings do not habituate to anxiety. So the whole point of ERP is not habituation. Instead, it is learning. Is this something that you've seen sort of being talked about?
There are 2 or 3 forms. I have 2 or 3 answers. There is one person who's using this argument incorrectly as a way of dumping on ERP, talking about living with uncertainty doesn't make sense. And so when they're saying it, it's wrong, because that actual argument, ERP doesn't lead to habituation of anxiety. In part, that's like an argument that's relevant for 1985, meaning that was the way ERP was presented in 1985. In a learning theory kind of way, if we're going really technical, it's a question. Yeah, well, I think the core thought is you actually don't unlearn. Something is not extinguished to nothingness. You don't ever unlearn something. So what would be more true is the most likely response you make is whatever you practice most. If you're practicing OCD symptoms, then those are going to be stronger. If you're practicing exposure, that will be stronger. Obviously, people have experienced reduction of anxiety. But the mechanism by which that anxiety is reduced, okay, now you're talking a heavy theoretical discussion, and it is highly likely, yes, it is not purely a process of habituation, that I just keep doing it over and over till I'm not scared. That probably plays a role, but there are probably a lot of cognitive and other things going on that support that. So it is not just simply habituation. I think of and now, again, because it takes so long for everybody to catch up. Yeah, I think there are people, there's certainly a ton of therapists who still will say that statement. So they're kind of behind the times, but finding crappy OCD treatment, unfortunately, is easy.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think of ERP ultimately as an acceptance model. Acceptance that I live in a world where anything can happen, and success is not making the right decisions. Success is coping with the consequences of whatever decision I made, because every decision's a guess, and I find out when it's too late if it was right or not. So I can't undo decisions. I can only move forward. So I think ERP and OCD treatment is much more complicated. I think it's a way of living in a world where anything can happen. I think it's learning to cope with the world and to hope I will be able to cope with whatever comes up. I can't say I will, but I'm a little more likely to cope with it if I have thought about it. So, I think the way the treatment works, we're doing multiple things. Habituation is one part. I said the person I have in mind, they kind of set up these straw man arguments because they're talking about a form and a vision of OCD that is not current thinking, and to me, of course, I don't know, just a tad biased. I cannot even imagine the idea of why would I not do uncertainty? Like in what world do you live where there is any certainty? And I can say that me and my colleagues have found when the pandemic first hit, that most of our clients who had succeeded in treatment did better than their families on the pandemic. They were calling us going they're all crazier than me.
Oh, yeah.
Because why? Because I've said this, you overcome OCD, you will not be normal. You will be better than normal, because although, the average person doesn't cope with uncertainty that well, better than somebody in the middle of their OCD, but on the average, they don't really cope with it that well. It's a small group that cope. So that's the core. And so I'm overcoming fear and learning to accept. And I think the exposure puts me in a position of coping with anxiety in a different way and getting some confidence I can do it. And, I'm making multiple changes. So it's not just a simple, yes, you're scared of dogs. And so I just put you in the room with a dog long enough and you stop being scared. It's a very intellectual process as well as a, core behavioral learning process.
Yeah. So in line with that rumination-focused ERP is the idea.
Which I don't know which by the way, I don't know what that means until you explain it. We're going.
Okay, so this came out, I saw it on the OCD stories. People started emailing me questions because it sounds much friendlier than classical ERP. The main idea behind this is that as long as you're not ruminating, if you are not ruminating at all, then you are experiencing almost no anxiety. And so before doing an exposure, what you want to do is be sure you are not ruminating at all, and our anxiety is at a 0 or a 1. If it's higher than a 1, we're not doing the exposure yet. Now, all I can do is remember my own experience here and say, I got very good at not ruminating, and I had plenty of exposures where my anxiety was way higher than a 1. So to me, it's just personal experience where I say, that doesn't completely make sense to me.
It sounds nice, it's stupid. Just to put a non-biased, non-judgmental thing on it, because in the old days, there was systematic desensitization, which sought to never get somebody anxious during the entire treatment of coping with anxiety, as opposed to a more flooding. And so scientifically, all right, you don't hear many people getting systematic desensitization anymore, where we make sure their anxiety never gets raised. So, in a statistical way, it might sound nice and you might like it. It doesn't work. The other two major flaws in that, I am sure in your history, there were sometimes you ran into somebody who said, don't worry about that. And of course, when they said that to you, well, oh my God, I hadn't thought of that. Don't worry. Great. Thank you. Okay, now I'm cured. And of course, you're like, yeah, I'd like to not worry about how the hell do I do that? So telling you not to ruminate, I think people do a hell of a lot of rituals over that. Not everybody, But a lot of people,
Yeah.
you know, and there's a whole group of people who obsess about obsessing. So they'd be like, oh my God, I'm still ruminating. And
Yeah.
to say, don't ruminate, it's not going to be a way to handle ruminating, you know, and again, now you're just setting the person up for a ritual. I can't be anxious and I can't ruminate. Okay, I'm sorry. Normal people get anxious and ruminate.
Yeah.
Okay, I mean, so it's not like yes, not at OC level, but that's a normal behavior. So I'm telling somebody where this is their problem to do something that normal people can't do.
Yeah.
I'm talking won't do. They can't do that. That is not human, you know. So learning to cope with anxiety, you know, one of the core things of ACT and ERP, but you know, because ACT exists, I'll give them some credit. But we were doing this before that. The core thing is, if I talk about being mindful, it doesn't mean that I'm relaxed and calm.
Yeah.
Mindful basically says, or ACT says, in their use of mindfulness, hey, there's going to be stress in life, and a lot of times things will actually suck. And our goal is, can we make it not worse than it has to be? You have a headache and it hurts. You have a headache and you're afraid it's brain cancer. Now the headache's like way worse. Can I get it down to just be a headache? But a headache still sucks. So
Yeah.
don't be anxious and don't ruminate. How about learn to cope with the source of what the rumination is? So I can make up, and there have been made up, a few really attractive treatments because they sound painless.
Yeah.
I generally will tell people that I think getting better hurts as much as staying sick. The difference is endless rituals or an end of rituals. So, you know, I think some of these techniques work for some people some of the time, you know, may even work for a while. I said, I think I know the individual you're speaking of. And he has some ideas that are okay. And then he has some ideas that are like, you're setting up straw man arguments and you're talking about an ERP that no longer exists. So
Right.
against a straw man 1985 ERP, yeah, well, there's some problems with that, but that's not ERP in the present. Now, that said, I do know some, every now and then I'll run into somebody with a name speaking that way, and it's like, oh yeah, God, you're the one giving us a bad name. You know, and I have particular characters in mind for that. But
Yeah.
you know, I think if we're talking to people at the cutting edge, for the most part, ERP is more than, oh, just do this and you're not going to be anxious. Again, I won't start treatment if you're not in agreement about wanting to cope with uncertainty, because that will fail. So right there, that's not a simple model of, oh, you're going to feel better. But obviously you can't accept uncertainty like that.
Yeah.
Snap, it's gone. Because then treatment be over. It's something you can decide, but you can decide, yeah, I want to learn how to do this. That's what I need people to decide.
It also seems that it's very possible to try to practice not ruminating while also not accepting uncertainty. So here you have a sort of collision of two main ideas.
I'd be impressed to see how a person practices not ruminating.
Yeah, I mean, the suggestion is, especially if the rumination involves solving or figuring out, and you talk about these mental rituals here in this book, you know, almost 20 years ago, analyzing, figuring out. So to me, I was always aware that ruminating in that way was considered a ritual. So let's try not to do it. But the other trapdoor I see this kind of approach stepping on is you can't anticipate when you're going to be exposed to something in nature, unexpectedly. So how can you be ready to be at a level one if a gay man comes up to me on the street and starts hitting on me and saying he knows that I'm gay, he can tell. I'm not prepared for that. And what do I do if my anxiety flies up to a 10? Do I disengage somehow? Like, you know, there's too many examples of this practically can't work.
Yeah, I know, and I think that's an important thing. Again, a flaw in many therapists, giving advice and not telling the person how to do that. So some of my favorites, I want you to sit with your feelings. I have to teach you how to sit with your feelings.
Yeah.
You know, but so many psychologists will just say, oh, just do that. You know, and you know, so the nearest the person can tell is like, okay, I'm going to sit here and suffer. And I agree, sitting with feelings is not going to be pleasant. but it can't just be, oh, just do that, la-di-da, and that's it. It's like you have to teach them that.
Mm.
So I think there are a lot of things that we can say and have to be taught. So, I think, in terms of that rumination issue, I mean, really, we're talking about how am I going to use scripts to compete with them, and how am I going to, again, if he's talking about rumination in terms of solving and figuring out, how am I going to undo that solving and figuring out, like, sorry, there's no way you're going to ever get there and go through the disadvantages of attempting to do that. It was kind of cute. I had a very young person, a kid, who was messed up in her schoolwork, and she was trying to do things too perfectly, and it was messing her up. And we were talking about doing exposure, and she said, we were talking about how her system, it may be the right system, but she can't do it because she keeps failing. And she said, but what if I could? What if it could be the right system? And I said to her, well, you're asking the wrong question. It might be the right system, which upset her because I'm not supposed to say that. But so far you failed at it. But here's the question. How many weeks, months, or years are you willing to give it a chance to try out? Like, and she said, like, do you want to try your way for a year? He said, well, what if the year goes by and like it doesn't work? I said, okay, you're merely telling me that a year is too long. So you want to devote a shorter time. How much more life do you want to lose testing this out? And of course, this young person wanted me to tell them what to do. I said, well, it's kind of therapeutic that you have to pick this, because this is just the first of many things. So you tell me, how long? And we spent, and we left through that. In the very next session, we spent the entire session like, how long how much do you want to give up? And what are your criteria for deciding whether to do treatment or not? And he said, well, I trust you. That's my main reason. I don't know if that's good enough. And it's like, well, that's a fair question. I think it should play a role, trusting me. But I said, okay, well, I guess it boils down to this. You're going to have to gamble wasting time. You can waste it doing it my way. You can waste it on your system. Which gamble do you want to pick? And she was having trouble. And then I said, well, I know you don't know the answer, and I don't know the answer to this question, but if you had to guess which system is going to work better and your mother's life depended on it, which guess do you make? So she decided her mother would be less likely to be shot if she picked mine. I said, okay, so what do you pick? And by the end of the session, because it did take the whole hour for her to come to like, all right, I guess I'm picking treatment. It was very important that she actually picked it. She was perfectly willing for me to say, do treatment.
Right.
But it had to be, I said to her, I have to be in a situation of saying to you, sorry, you picked this. Do you remember why you picked this? Not that we knew. So there are ways we handle ruminating that involve exposure that, well, they work. Statistically, they work. Fred Penzel once said, there's always something that will work for some people some of the time.
Right.
But if you're picking a treatment, why don't you pick what works for most people most of the time?
Yeah.
So the data is ERP, and this other thing, it's theoretically flawed, and I think maybe it works for the individual who made it up.
Yeah, he is an OCD sufferer himself.
I know.
Now.
Yeah.
Okay.
But
yeah.
Hey, so is John Hirschfield, so is Shella nicely.
Yeah.
And they're supporters of the whole uncertainty thing.
Right. Yeah, and where I get a little stuck on it too is I did get very good. I became a mindfulness certified mindfulness coach. By the time I started working with you and Harold, I started working at Penn doing mindfulness. Mm-hmm. And I had to be careful, just like ACT, to find ways not to undermine the treatment, right. Which is what a lot of my videos are about now. Is if you're doing mindfulness, let's dodge the landmines that might hurt. But so the thing is, I did get very good at knowing when I was up here analyzing and ruminating and figuring out. And my experience is on times where I wasn't doing that, I still had high anxiety. So I just don't find, for me personally, that there's truth to that statement. But yeah, hey, if eating green beans makes your OCD feel better, then go ahead and do it.
Yeah. I mean, I think if that is my main ritual, Well, yeah, if I'm not doing it, I'll be better. If it's just one of my side rituals, it's, going to be less important. But I don't know. It's like saying, well, why not just avoid everything? That works too.
Or if you get so good at ruminating, why even have to do ERP? If you are getting to a point where your anxiety is always at a 0 or 1, what else do you have to do?
Right.
Yeah. All right. Last question for you.
Last question.
Here's one that comes up a lot. Since I was an HOCD guy, a lot of my videos focus on HOCD. And I talk about how when I finally started doing heavy exposures that were what I call airtight, for me, just watching gay porn wasn't airtight because I could figure out if I was getting aroused or not. And if I wasn't getting aroused, then that immediately became a very happy ritual. I
So
felt
that's a
better.
very risky approach, because if I think enough about sex, many people will start to experience a feeling. And so for me, if somebody was getting any kind of genital sensation watching gay sex, I would say, yeah, that tells me nothing.
Yeah, I agree with that.
So like what would tell me something is you wake up, and again, you have no doubt you feel like going down on a guy, and it's like that makes you super hard. Not like maybe it's like, oh, it's as definite as like you're sitting on a chair, right? Then you have definitely gay fantasies. You might not actually be gay, but I know that gay fantasies excite you. But no offense, but the arousal during the film, because there's a whole group of people that then constantly focus on their penis, trying to think, is it aroused, and
right.
We know like there are rape victims who will lubricate or even have orgasm, and it's not like they liked it, and for them it's a horrifying experience, because it's like in a way it's almost OCD like, because it's like like they're beat the heck out of themselves. So it's really horribly sad. So anyway, I'm sorry to interrupt, but that's not actually a good measurement. So you found something more airtight.
Right. Yeah. So for me, like something like that would backfire. Reading coming out stories would backfire, because if it didn't sound like me, then it just was ritualistic and it made me happy. It's almost like if someone had nothing but late bloomer, I didn't know I was gay coming out stories, those would be pretty effective. So eventually I actually masturbated to gay porn, because now I couldn't gauge whether I was aroused by it. I couldn't gauge whether if I finished to it, was it just because I was touching myself? Was it because I was watching the gay porn? And so this left me entirely uncertain. And then I really didn't ritualize. And I found that when I finally found some of these airtight exposures, I really started feeling a lot of relief.
Mm-hmm.
The question that comes up a lot, though, is why not then just go out and make your exposure having sex with men? Why not go all the way and have sex with someone of the same sex? What I say to them is, well, you're probably trying to figure out if you're doing it. If you somehow manage to turn it into just an exposure, you can get better without going to those lengths. That's what I would say. But
it's one of the few exposures we don't do, and because it won't tell me anything. You could have sex with a guy and really find, come on, and like it, and then be horrified afterwards. And so like, I don't know what that means. There are guys who have had some gay experience for, not being gay, but got in the situation of it. And maybe they liked it and they never did anything gay again. So even though they like came and had a good time, even if they're embarrassed. So that doesn't tell me.
Doesn't tell you, but at the very least, wouldn't that be an effective exposure if it really amped up your?
Oh, well, it's an exposure, but again, the level of intimacy it involves, and involvement, and hey, like what if you're married and you have the gay porn things? Like I think your spouse would feel just as they probably don't want you messing with another person of the same sex, and just as they don't want messing with a person of the opposite sex. So it's kind of so. I think too many other human things are like that. And a story that would horrify most people with HOCD. There was a young man I saw in the 80s who had HOCD, and his previous therapist had him do that. He didn't like it. It didn't fix anything. He still had HOCD, and we did our usual treatment, and it was good. He stopped having the fear. he calls me about 7 years later, and his life is great. You know, he'd gone to graduate school, he's doing all this stuff, and he figured out he was gay. He was living a gay lifestyle. So he's the HOCD nightmare story.
Boy, that's going to trigger a lot of people. They hate that story.
Yes, I know. And you know what? I can tell you statistically, rare.
Right.
You know, I mean, I had one other person who told me they had HOCD, but they kept having gay liaisons in bathrooms, and they would blame that on HOCD. It's like, okay, you know what?
Yeah,
you're gay. But it took a while to get for that person to cross that line, but that was different. But anything can happen. Now, how often does that happen? Well, I've seen that happen once, you know, where that was the problem and they switched over. Safety, I think I said this already, but safety is not a fact, it's a probability statement. So maybe I'll wake up gay tomorrow. Maybe I will slice and dice Kathy tonight and go crazy. You know, maybe my grandson, who's cute as a button, he's 6. You know, that's why we're in California. We moved because my daughter-in-law was having a kid.
I thought it was because you were. I thought it's because you were a rock star OCD doc and you wanted to be out there on the West Coast.
I know. You know, maybe tomorrow I'll wake up and be a pedophile with him. It's funny. We just went on vacation with him in the desert to escape LA. And, you know, we're all living in the same house playing with him. It's kind of funny. So he and I are in the bedroom and we're hitting each other because, you know, this will be a shock. Everybody has a role in the family. My role is crazy grandpa. So, you know, it's like, he's always like, Papa John, will you be wild with me? Like, all right. So we'll be wild. And we're rolling around in the bed and we're throwing things. And I'm thinking, wow, you know, this would be the situation that like a pedophile would take advantage of. You know, so I'm not worried I'm a pedophile, and I know nobody's going to accuse me of it, but it's like, okay, this is weird. Now, if I had POCD, you know, I'd be off and running. It's like, why did I have that thought? Do I really want to do this? Oh no, and all that stuff. I don't have OCD, you know, but that doesn't mean tomorrow I won't wake up and be a pedophile. I'm not expecting it.
Yeah.
All I have is odds. I worked with a woman. It was really lovely. And she, you know, she said, I really do have the feeling that I could control and figure out any situation, that if I got cancer, like I would be able to figure out how to get cured, you know, even besides that. And, you know, we were talking about, you know, I was talking to her about like, well, how do you know which quack cures to pick? Because, you know, some of them are quacks, some are real. And we basically destroyed her system. And you know, it's not just simply like, oh, big deal, you know, and I can't do this. I mean, this really destroys her entire view of the world. So this is really big that, oh my God. And she said the following week, now for her, it was in a positive way. She just kept kind of wandering around, going in a fog, going, the odds. Because they're like, what do I have? I said, you just have the odds, nothing else. But that, of course, leads to the transition of, I can't control everything. So I think I was answering something. I might remember the question. I'm hoping, but I think this was all relevant. But
it's all relevant.
Cool. So we've got the odds. That's it. And oh, you know, this, you know, that story that people didn't like. Everything happens. Probably. It may not happen often, and so the best we can do is treat it like the car crash you don't want to be in.
And I'd encourage anyone who just saw that to use that as your exposure and to let it hit you if it hits you, and don't spend 1 second trying to figure it out.
Well, spend a lot of seconds arguing why you will not be able to figure it out.
Yeah.
See, that's the argument you can do. You know, I can't, because my head's going to be going in the background and I can't really stop that. I'm sorry, that's like, you can't stop that. But where, you know, in a mindful way, where do I give the most attention? So that's going on while I'm actively going like, okay, I really want to figure this out. That's never going to work. Why is this never going to work? Well, you know, like, how can I ever actually be certain? And going through a list of why it's better for me to not actively figure it out. Like, this is how my OCD goes off. So I'm not stopping it. I'm competing with it. I'm not competing with it where I'm banging into the ground. I'm not hearing it. In a certain moment, I might be incredibly anxious and it's really screaming, and I'm just paying more attention to, what's there, but more attention sounds more positive. I'm struggling to hold on to these thoughts
Yeah.
of why this doesn't make sense for me to try to figure it out. That I can do. That, I think in designing treatment, one of the mantras we have is it's really important to do something that a dead person can't do. Dead people are great at response prevention. They suck at exposure.
Mm. Yeah.
So even if I'm thinking counter thoughts, that's something active.
Yeah. Well, John, I appreciate your time. I think this will be
Pleasure.
very, very helpful. And are you enjoying LA? Is it better than Philadelphia?
It's got its pluses. I happen to like it. I mean, I enjoyed living in Center City, Philadelphia. LA is not a walking town. I'm in Pasadena, a little bit more of a walking town.
Okay.
I do love the weather, and people ask, what about the earthquakes? And here's a strange fact about LA. This is dead serious. People in LA are more afraid of rain than they are of earthquakes. They freak out when it rains.
Yeah, goes to show you ERP works for people who don't even have OCD.
Exactly.
All right. Well, hey, man, I really do appreciate it.
My pleasure, man.
I'll let you know when I figure out how to get it from the cloud and post it. Are you okay with me posting this?
If I wasn't, I was pretty foolish doing it.
All right.
All right.
All right. Thanks
Take
again.
care. My pleasure.
Take care.
Bye-bye.